Good morning. How are you? Wow, Joseph's life was amazing, wasn't it? Well, today the story continues, and we are going to look at two brave, courageous people today. And so far, we've just studied some men, but this story today is about two girls. One's a woman, and one's a child. So it's a good example on how you are not too young to be courageous in the Lord. So we left the Israelites. That's what they became known, the 12 tribes of Israel, or Jacob. Remember, Israel was Jacob's new name that God gave him. Excuse me. And if we're going to the next book of the Bible called Exodus, so it's Genesis, Exodus, chapter 1, and we're going to verse 6. In time, Joseph and all of his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. So they prospered there in Egypt, just like God said they would. And then in verse 8, eventually a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, "Look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country." So the new king did not know Joseph, did not know all that story about, or if he knew it, he just really had kind of forgotten about it. He didn't know Joseph personally. So he's scared because the Israelites are doing so well, and there's so many of them, more than the Egyptians. So what did they do? Excuse me. In verse 11, the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramses as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So God was able to prosper the Israelites even when they were being used as slaves and being abused. They still continued to prosper. And the Egyptians noticed this, and it made them fearful. So the Egyptians, look in verse 13. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in all their demands. Then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives: "When you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live." So the king is really getting scared. He is afraid that the Israelites are going to be more powerful than they are, so much so that he would be willing to kill little bitty babies just because they were boys who would grow into being men. Well, guess what? The midwives feared God. Look in verse 17. And they refused to obey the king's orders, and they allowed the boys to live. So look right there. There's some more women who were courageous. They went against. We are told to obey those that are in authority over us. But if it goes against God's laws and God's will, then we need to not obey. We need to disobey those things that are against God's will. And they did. And they were very brave to do that because they could be killed themselves for not obeying. So in verse 18, the king of Egypt calls for the midwives. "Why have you done this?" he demanded. "Why have you allowed the boys to live?" And the Hebrew women, they replied, "The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women," the midwives replied. "They're more vigorous and have their babies so quickly that we cannot get there in time." So they didn't exactly tell the truth, but that was their excuse, and they were courageous not to change their mind. So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. Then Pharaoh had another idea because he is so scared. He gave this order in verse 22. Throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live. They would be slaves. So about this time in chapter 2, a man and a woman from the tribe of Levi got married, and the woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and she saw that he was a very special baby, and she kept him hidden for 3 months, because as soon as the baby boys were born, the Pharaoh's soldiers would come and throw them in the Nile River, and of course they would be eaten by alligators and whatnot, or drowned first probably. So she hid him for 3 months. And you realize Chloe and Lexi are, gosh, Chloe's almost a year old and Lexi's 10 months old. So it was back when they were little bitty, 3 months old. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket made out of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. And she put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. The baby's sister, her name was Mariam, by the way, stood at a distance watching to see what would happen to him. So the mother was very courageous and brave to come up with this plan. And I believe that God must have given her that creative idea, because she knew that the baby was getting too old to keep him quiet anymore. So she comes up with this plan. And Mariam, his sister, is supposed to watch and see what happens. So Mariam had to be very brave to stay there by herself and watch out for her baby brother and see what happens. So in verse 5, Pharaoh's daughter came down to take a bath in the river, and her attendants walked along the river bank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. The little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This must be one of the Hebrew children," she said. Then the baby's sister approached the princess. "Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" she asked. So Mariam was very brave. When the princess found the baby, instead of running away in fear, she went forward. And I'm sure this was part of the plan too. Either that or God showed her what to say. She went forward. She said, "Should I go get somebody to nurse the baby or to feed the baby for?" Who do you think she might get? Yeah. And so the princess says, "Yes, do." So the girl went and called the baby's mother. "Take this baby and nurse him for me," the princess told the baby's mother. "I will pay you for your help." So the woman took her baby home and nursed him. So how funny is that? Not only was Moses saved, and the mom gets to take care of him as long as he needs to nurse, and the princess pays her to nurse the baby. So Moses is saved. And then in verse 10, later when the boy was older, his mother brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. The princess named him Moses, for she explained, "I lifted him out of the water." It means to lift out. She lifted him out of the water. So isn't that a strange story? The mom was brave not to try to hide her baby and to keep him protected. And she was brave to put him in a little boat in the water where there's alligators and stuff. And then the sister was brave to watch over. The midwives were brave to not kill the babies themselves. And then the princess, actually, it's very strange because that was the order for them to kill the Hebrew boy babies. But she was she fell in love with him when she saw him. So she was actually courageous too, to have to tell her dad, Pharaoh, that she was adopting actually a Hebrew son. And I'm sure he loved her so much and thought that the Hebrew would be raised like an Egyptian. He must have just honored her request. but there are many brave women in this story, wasn't there? All right, well, stay tuned and we'll find out who else has to have courage. Who has to have courage today? Jake, Eli, Caleb, Kylie, Claire, Jenna and Emily, and Aunt Jane for sure, Meemaw Jane. Okay, I love you guys. Have a great day.